Hey guys, before we dive in, I wanted to discuss my latest course called Hello Rails. This course is about Ruby on Rails, and it's about taking an app from an idea and turning it into a realistic production level app. So we'll talk about everything from installing Ruby on Rails to literally using front-end frameworks to kind of enhance it, deploying the app, things like testing, talking about test-driven development. All of those topics and more will be covered in this course. It is more of a beginner guide to get into the framework. So if you're a seasoned pro, this might not be for you, but my hope is that maybe you too could learn something from this course. This course is my attempt to transition what I've learned over the years and give back. So check out Hello Rails at hellorails.io or follow us on Twitter at hello_rails. If you have any questions or feedback from me, feel free to tell me personally, leave comments on this channel, wherever you can find me, get at me. And with that, we will continue on. Hey all, welcome to a new mini series on a Ruby on Rails concept, but it's actually focusing on the gem known as Devise. And Devise, if you aren't sure, is an authentication solution for Rails. And behind the scenes, it does a lot for us. And there's so much that it does. I thought maybe make a little series off of it, ways you could extend it and or use it to provide things like social sign-on or OmniAuth kind of setup. Adding custom fields to Devise, so when people onboard, they are passing new data to you instead of just like a username or email, or overriding some of the defaults that come with Devise. This series will focus on. We'll also kind of look at inviting users to a platform, so that's another gem we'll focus on integrating into Devise, known as Devise Invitable, and then one called Devise Masquerade later on that will allow you to act as other users in your app, all through Devise. So the whole concept is focusing on this gem, but my initial go at this is just to start extending it so you get a little more comfortable with using the gem if you are a proponent of it. I use it for pretty much any Rails app that I put out there, simply because it just does a lot of the work for me and I'm familiar with it. There are comparable gems out there that do things for you similarly. Kind of want to explain the core concepts as well as just understand the ways you can extend it. So to kick things off, we'll start with basic updates to adding fields to a Devise app. We're going to actually create a new app. It's going to have a new terms field, like you opt into specific terms when you create an account, and then a location field. And I figured while we're at it, on the location field, we'll use another gem to kind of deal with geolocation. So we kind of find that user's location given the context of where they're at in their by their IP address. So that was actually a request someone gave to me out on YouTube a while back, is to kind of focus on geolocation. And realistically, you need a service to help you with that. So I'm going to actually subscribe to one that's called IP Info. It is a paid thing, but it's got a free tier that you can hook into for so many requests. I'll show you more on that in a second, but what I want to do first is add fields to a new Rails app. But first we need a Rails app. So I'll create a new app. I'm going to use my kickoff tailwind. I already have this directory in my sites directory. If you want to, use it, you totally can. It's up on GitHub. I'll link to it. This is just kind of a boilerplate kickoff to a Rails app that just installs Devise for us and then just gets some things set up out of the gates. It does extend Devise to already have a username field, which I did behind the scenes, but we'll extend it even further with these new fields so you can see by example. So I'm going to go back to my sites directory, and with that folder in mind and this template RB file in mind, I'm going to actually pass that locally. So when I want to run a Rails new app, I'll say Devise custom fields, and then I'll pass in the -m for the template, and then we'll pass in the local path. So kickoff tailwind /template.rb. So I'm going inside this folder in that directory, in my sites directory, and grabbing that template to pass through. Yours might vary. You might need to pass a pretty long URL here if you just downloaded this and are running it from your downloads folder or something like that. If worst comes to worst, you cd into this directory and just run a Rails new and pass in just this template.rb file, that's fine. And then from there, you can pull that folder out and put it somewhere else and run it. but I'll just do this for now. So we're going to run this. It's going to create a new app and just do some general setup that I do by default with my kickoff template. So we'll start with that and go from there. Okay, so with the app created, we can go ahead and cd into it. So I'm going to say cd devise custom fields. Great, so we have our app set up. It's already kind of integrated and we have the whole Rails environment ready to rock and roll. I'm going to open this in Visual Studio Code. The app itself, the main thing we want to do is focus on getting our Devise installation customized, because we want to add some fields to it. Say you want to opt in, have users opt into some terms and conditions and get their location by default when they create an app. So let's first just boot up this thing and see what it looks like. So I am running Rails 6 at this time. If we go to localhost 3000, wait for that to load. There we go. Okay, so here's the base template. Nothing new here. It's the Kickstart template that I've created revolving around Rails 6. We already have on Devise the setup already integrated. So we have a login form, a sign up form, and then all these other forms that come with the authentication gem once it's added to your app by default. The problem is we need to extend this to use both that terms and conditions checkbox and then also the location field. So what I'll do is add that as a migration to kick things off. Go into a new tab here and just do that while the other server is running behind the scenes. And I'll do, what was it, Devise custom fields. Okay, so we'll add a new migration called Rails generate add. It could be anything, but you could say add, I think a generic one will be good, fields to users. So it's going to go on the user's table. So we need to associate with the model of the user who gets signed up and mentioned. So Devise is all focused on the user by default, and it connects to the user model. Now you could use a different model if you want. So say like an account model or profile model, something like that. But I think user is the most common. So we'll go with that. And the way naming convention works here is we're adding fields to the user's table. So this is going to already know that that's going to focus on the user's table in our database, which already exists at this point thanks to the template setup that I have. If you weren't already doing that, you would need to add a user's table to your app and do all that pre-work of installing Devise through the gates, which you can check their docs on how to do that. It's pretty straightforward. So what I want to do is add a terms as a Boolean and then location as a string. And that's just going to say basically true or false for this terms field, and location will be a string field. So we're going to get the actual city of the person who is logged in or signed up at that point. So we'll say that's good to go. We do need the key term migration on this line. No, I forgot that. Migration. Great, so it should create a new file in our DB folder that's called this long string. It's timestamped, so we can always roll it back if we need to. I'll go ahead and check that file out so you guys can see what happened. So like I said, thanks to the user's naming conventions, Rails already kind of knows what's going on. So it already propagates the column to the user's table here. And here's the new fields they're adding, and this is their type. And this is all inherited from this migration class in active record, which is built into Rails and is a glorious thing. So when we run this migration, which we still need to do, we'll get this new field in our database schema. We have a schema so far. It's stuff that's kind of boilerplate with the template that I ran. That's basically the stuff you get with Devise by default, minus the username and the name field, which I've added to that template. That gets auto-generated. Oh, the same with the admin too. So these are custom, but by default, all this stuff otherwise would come with your Devise installation if you're on your own running this. Or if you're just following along, you needn't worry. So with that in, we could boot up the server. A new cool feature to Rails is that will kind of prompt you to migrate this. If you aren't using this better errors gem, which I am, unfortunately, you'd see a button there to actually run those migrations. So instead we'll do Rails db migrate, And those got migrated in. So we've got that in our database schema now. If you go back and check in the DB schema right here. So we've got terms and location. Pretty cool. Nothing fancy there. So with that in place, we can go ahead and kind of just update our views to reflect what would be in the app. So it's not going to save to the database yet because we need to permit those fields with Devise, but let's go ahead and update our views so we can see them in action. So in your views folder, if you've installed Devise or used my template, you'll see a Devise directory. Inside that, the main one we want to focus on is registrations new. And this is going to be the sign up form. So in here, you'll see a form like this. It might have less fields because mine's customized, but you can also customize it further if you want to. So inside here, we're going to actually update the to include the location and the terms field. So the location will be here. I'll just put it below email, and all we'll do is change this to location and this to text field, and this to location. We can get rid of this autocomplete class input there. We will come back and set a value with the geolocation bit that I talked about initially, but we'll come back and do that. Below the password, right before the submit button, I'll add the new terms field. So this is we're using Tailwind as a CSS framework here. So if you're not familiar with that, that's what all these classes are that you see. So we'll say f.checkbox and just say terms, and then you can give it a class here just to kind of push it to the right. And then below that, we'll have the label, the terms, and I'll just say a random string. I agree to conditions. Okay. So if we go to sign up now, we should see those fields. So there we go. We got the checkbox and then the location. So that's fine. This form is getting pretty long, so we'd probably want to redesign this, but I'll worry about that another time. So next, to get these permitted parameters or fields to actually save, right now if you signed up, they would not save. In fact, there would be an error. And that's because Rails strong parameters. And the way to go around that is to actually hook into the application layer on the Devise gem itself. So normally in your actual controller, whatever form it would be, you could permit those things as permitted params. But this is the workaround in the Devise world on how to hook into the gem and do those things independently. So since my template generated this by default, you needn't worry if you're following completely along and are using that. But if not, you need a method like this, and it's a protected method. So everything below this line is protected. And in this case, it's the configured parameters. So here we call a method called Devise Parameter Sanitizer that comes from the gem. And then we could permit new keys, or otherwise known as fields in our case, to pass in when a user signs up or updates their account. So the same is true on the views. We need to actually update the edit to include the location real quick. So I'll actually copy that from this one. Just go to edit, paste that below. Cool. So going back to that controller again, I put it in our application there because it's kind of a globalized thing, but you could create a new controller that inherits from Devise if you want to as well. It's called the registrations controller, but this kind of does all this in one place as opposed to creating tons of new controllers. So how you approach that's up to you. I would look at the docs if you need to really customize this, but in theory, we've already got our username and name attribute, but since we've added our other names, our other fields, we need to pass in terms. And actually here, I won't need to do terms, but we'll do location. And here we'll do terms and location as symbols. So that allows us to actually add these things when they are submitted or created in Devise, and it permits those by being passed through the request and saving them to the database. So it's kind of a security thing that's been in Rails since version 4, I think. So here's the workaround for the Devise gem. The main one here, main thing to notice is we didn't pass terms in the second one because on the account edit, I don't really want to allow the user to update that they've already opted into that on sign up. So this field right here, I agree to the terms and conditions, doesn't really make sense to do on the edit account page. So instead we just use it here on the sign up page just to get that one-time commitment. So sign up and account update. So these all come from Devise. Don't assume I just created these randomly. There's just some conventions going on there. So with that in place, that data should save at this point. So we could create an account realistically, but I want to show you how to enable the geolocation bit. Okay, so there's an app called ipinfo.io, and from that you can actually hook into a lot of data based on your location or IP address. I have a VPN running, so you can't see where I'm exactly at, but this one that I have running is in Denver, Colorado. So what we want to do is hook into the city attribute from this data and get it back into the location field. So when a user signs up, we can already have that kind of figured out in the app. So it'd be pretty handy to just already have their city displayed here, even though it's kind of a minor detail that they could already just input. But you never know. Little attention to detail like that is pretty nice. So this is kind of just a very quick example on how to use it. It does have a lot of support for different frameworks. If you're coming from Python, PHP, or Perl, Laravel, etc. We're going to use the Ruby on Rails version, hence why we're doing Rails in the first place. So what I want to do is first install the gem. So we'll go to our gem file and add that at the very end. I've got other stuff in here you can ignore for now, but we'll just say ipinfo rails, do a bundle install. You can keep your server running if you want in the background. That'll go ahead and install that gem so we have it ready to use. There is some configuration to go about in this gem, so we need to deal with that. We'll go into our actual environment, and you can do a dependent environment or just an environment RB, and you can load in stuff in this particular environment specifically. I'll just do development for now. I would do it per environment if I were you, just so you can actually kind of debug if there is an error, what's going on at the time. So in development, our IP address is definitely going to be like a local host address. So we'll need to actually use another service called Grogg that fictitiously creates a remote server running a local tunnel. So it sounds complicated, but it just kind of creates a new URL based on your local server that's served on an actual remote area. That way you can actually see live things off your local environment. So in our case, we actually want to pull in a city instead of dealing with our local environment. This would error out otherwise. So if you're running into that error, that's why, because in local hosts, that simply will not work. So config.middleware, we need to assign this to use this class by that gem. So ipinfo middleware. And then it needs a access token. So this is kind of validates that you're basically a client of theirs. And in here you can input, what I'm going to do is do a Rails application, credentials, and then dig, and then we'll pass in ipinfo token. So this will go into our credentials, and we need to still generate this, but essentially what you need to do is go sign up for an account for this app. So right here, ipinfo sign up, and you'll see my access token here. I don't care if you use this, I'm not going to use this account. So I'll go ahead and grab that and then come over to the app again, and we need to create that secret key. So in our credentials, we can say Rails credentials edit, and it's going to fire back, oh, you didn't pass an editor. So we need to actually use code or Visual Studio Code as our editor by passing in this environment variable. So I'll say edit or equals code, and then wait. and Rails credentials edit. So what's happening here is you're going to fire up a code editor. It's going to decrypt the file that's in your app right now, which is in config credentials YML enc. This is totally encrypted here. You can't read it, but it will be decrypted once that command is run. But it'll only open in your code editor that you passed. And upon closing, will it save and re-encrypt that key. So what we'll do is fire that up. This will open up code. You'll see a secret key that's already in here. This is stuff that's been decrypted at this point. You see the new file name here. This will eventually go away once we close this file. But what I want to do is add in our key. And I called it IP info token. I'll paste that key in, save that file. Once you close it, you're going to go back to your terminal. And you're going to see it says file encrypted and saved. And that allows us to get that application key from our app at any point. So here's where I'm digging for that. It'll go ahead and find it. I have to spell it right though. IP info token. So that should be all it needs to really do the magic. Once we get everything rolling, we need to go ahead and input the location field of the city we're after. So I'm going to go ahead and create a value for that. So we can actually pass in a defined value. I'm going to just call it city, which will end up being a Rails helper that I use. So quickly jumping to our helpers. It's just a way to extract logic from our app. So in our case, I'm going to say def city. And the way the gem works is you get a request back that looks like this. So you can tap into the requests, and if it's in this info field, based on that gem, we can hook into things like the country name, the location, longitude, latitude, all this stuff here, which is pretty handy and pretty neat. So what I'll do is kind of hook into that in this case. So we'll say request .env and then IP info. And then we'll say .city, because you notice city is an actual attribute on this hash here we can hook into. But this could error out if it isn't there. So we kind of want to say if requests .env IP info .city. So just checking if it is actually there. And that way we can just hook into this tiny little method into our views right here. So city. And then I need to update the one in new as well. So we'll say city. Okay, so it's worth it to restart your server at this point. We've modified keys, we've modified configs, so it's really worthwhile to do that. Looks like I made a typo in our config, so I'll go back to that real quick. Should be middleware. Here we go. So we're booting up, and if we were to go to this page, it's definitely going to error out because there is no city on the local host. That wouldn't make sense, right? And we're in our local development. There's no method for city, so we're getting an error. You could, do some checks to just go ahead and resolve that if it doesn't work. But what we can do is mimic our local environment to go ahead and run ngrok, which is another service we need to tap into. That's going to go ahead and forward a port on our local host to use another host to go ahead and go into the account and find that location. So it'll kind of react as a remote server. So ngrok, you can go ahead to ngrok.com and download it. I'm going to try to add this with yarn. So I'll just say yarn add ngrok. It'll just be a global dependency that would save to our local user system. So I'm going to see if that did the trick. Yeah, so we have it now. It will need to be, you'll find that in your user account. If you're on a Mac, it'll be a dot file, so you need to see your dot files. If you don't know how to do that, you can go check out Google. It's just a one-liner to go ahead and run that and show these files. And inside here, you need to unzip it. And inside that will be ngrok. So we need a way to pass this to our app. So we can say, I'm going to go ahead and pass it here. So we get this path. So what I want to do is make it a little alias and go to my ZSH, make an alias for that. And it's just going to go to that path. I don't really need it to perform an operation. So I just want to copy this bit to the dot folder. I know this seems complicated, but it's kind of just set up to get this to work. So pass that in, close that file. Now if we go into our command line, we should be able to, probably need a new terminal. So let's go to a new terminal, open this up. And if I do ngrok, there we go, we get that dot file. So if we do pwd, we have that user location in our path. So now we can just run ngrok. And then we need to run our authentication. So if you go to your account and grab an auth token, I'll just copy and paste mine. And then finally, we can run a ngrok server. If you want to see more about, what you can do with this, ngrok help, and you get more stuff here. But it might make sense to just go ahead and run a port so you can see the point of all this. So if you say ngrok HTTP and then 3000, so 3000 correlates to our Rails server. If you notice, we're running on localhost 3000. You want to match whatever localhost you're running. So we'll run that. And of course, permission denied. What is that for? Oh, I need to pass .ngrok HTTP 3000, right? There we go. So that creates this new link that's on basically mirroring your localhost. So if you visit this in our browser, we're going to have this error, and it's because Rails is blocking requests. It's being secure, which is awesome. So we need to actually add this to our environment on development. So I'll show you how to do that. Go back to code, development, just add this line right here. Just basically allows that to happen. So then if we restart our Rails server, but not your ngrok server, we'll go and revisit the app, refresh, just in this ngrok setup, and you should see your app, which is perfect. That's what we want. So we've got that going. We got this going at the same time. Put it over here. And you can see some of the requests that happen and transpire, which is neat. But what we want to really look at is the location. You can see there is my city now. So that's pretty cool. Now locally, you'd probably want to check that this environment, you probably only want to do this in your either production environment or staging environment or something that's live on a server, because locally it's always going to be erroring out unless you're using this ngrok app. But otherwise, it does work. So we could go ahead and create a username. And let's agree to the terms. We'll say sign up. We signed up successfully. Very cool. If we go back into our logs, we can see more about that user. So we have a username, we have a name, created at, updated at. Terms is a 1, which means true. And location is Denver, which is pretty neat. So all that happened. I didn't even have to type in my location. So that's a look at extending Devise and kind of looking into some very primitive geolocation. Most geolocation apps out there, they're going to require a service of some sort. So you have to sign up to get more of the offering. You could look into like JavaScript localhost IP geolocation, but unfortunately, it only gives you latitude and longitude. So you need some way to resolve that to map to cities and locations like that. So that's where these services come in. Unfortunately, they get pricey. So if you really need it, it's probably worthwhile. But otherwise, I would try to maybe just for fields like that in particular, the location field, it's probably not necessary. So hopefully you learned something with this. This series is going to continue to look at more and more of extending Devise and making it more customizable for your app. Things like providing confirmation instructions via email. So if a user signs up, they need to confirm their account first. You see that all the time in apps in the wild. How to redirect after sign in and sign out, or editing an account without that password. So if I'm logged in, if I go to my account, I think it's, what is it? Users, edit. Yeah. So in Devise, you have to provide an account to make any changes here. So it's kind of annoying, but you can provide a workaround for that if need be. And then on top of that, we'll have, I think OmniAuth I'll add to the stack too, like logging with Twitter or GitHub or Facebook, Google, etc. And a bunch more. So I hope you look forward to it. I'm excited to kick this off. I've been dealing with this stuff on my other apps, so I feel like I should share the wealth. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.